Stop scrolling for a moment. Because the small coin you are looking at may look completely ordinary, but its story begins at one of the most interesting turning points in modern British coinage. This is a 1992 United Kingdom 10-pence coin, featuring Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse and the crowned lion on the reverse. And the year 1992 is particularly interesting because it marks the introduction of the smaller 10p design. The Royal Mint had decided that Britain needed a lighter and smaller 10p, and on 30 September 1992, the new version entered circulation. The smaller coin measured about 24.5 millimeters across and weighed approximately 6.5 grams, while the older 10p was much larger and heavier. Royal Mint. But here is where the story becomes much more exciting. When people discover an old coin, the first question is usually, how much is it worth? The smarter question is, exactly which coin do I have? Because the date alone does not tell the entire story. There were different 1992 10p issues, including the regular smaller circulation coin and larger 1992 examples produced for Royal Mint sets. There were also different varieties associated with the smaller 10p, including differences involving the obverse lettering, reverse details, and edge construction. Numista. So if you have a 1992 10p sitting in your collection, do not immediately throw it back into your pocket. And do not immediately believe anyone telling you that every example is worth a fortune. Instead, look at it as a mystery waiting to be solved. The coin may be common, it may be a special set issue, it may have a collectible variety, or in a much more unusual situation, it could contain a genuine minting error. And that difference is everything. The internet is full of dramatic claims about ordinary coins supposedly being worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. But a responsible collector has to separate excitement from evidence. The regular 1992 small 10p was struck in enormous numbers, so simply having the date 1992 does not make it a guaranteed millionaire coin. What makes the search worthwhile is the possibility of discovering something unusual hidden within that ordinary-looking date. That is the real story of this coin, and once you understand its history, you will never look at a 10p in quite the same way again. To understand why the 1992 date matters, we have to travel back to the history of British decimal currency. Britain introduced decimal coinage in 1971, but the 10p denomination had actually appeared earlier, in 1968, when the country began preparing for decimalization. The original 10p was deliberately made the same size and weight as the old 2-shilling florin so that the transition could happen smoothly. That older 10p was a large, heavy silver-colored coin, measuring around 28.5 millimeters and weighing roughly 11.3 grams. The old format continued for many years, but eventually the government and the Royal Mint decided that Britain should move towards smaller and lighter coins. This decision was not made simply because someone wanted a different-looking coin. There were practical reasons behind the change, including concerns about the weight of the coinage and the needs of businesses, the public and coin-operated machines. British parliamentary records describe the decision to introduce a smaller 10p in 1992, following consultations during the 1980s Hansard UK Parliament. That means your 992 coin represents much more than a random date stamped into metal. It represents a physical change in the everyday money used by millions of people. Imagine Britain in the early 1990s. The country was entering a new era of technology, changing consumer habits and changing forms of communication, while its pocket change was changing too. Suddenly, the familiar large 10p had a smaller successor. The new coin was easier to carry, lighter in weight, and designed for the modern currency system. The Royal Mint records the smaller version as beginning in September 1992, while the older large version was eventually demonetized in 1993 Royal Mint. This transition makes 1992 particularly interesting for collectors because it sits right at the boundary between two generations of the denomination. The year itself, therefore, has historical importance. Even before we begin discussing rarity or condition, when you hold a 1992 small 10p, you are holding a coin from the first year of that smaller format. It is not an ancient coin, but it has now passed more than 3 decades since its introduction. It has potentially traveled through shops, pockets, cash registers, vending machines, and households before eventually reaching a collector. Every mark on a circulated coin can tell part of that story. And that is why serious collectors do not look at a coin only as money. They look at it as an object that survived a particular period of history. Now take a close look at the design, because the artwork itself tells us exactly what kind of coin we are dealing with. On the obverse is the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, while the reverse displays the famous crowned lion with the denomination 10 pence beneath it. The obverse design used during this period was created by Raphael Makhlouf, while the reverse design was created by Christopher Ironside, Royal Mint. That crowned lion is particularly recognizable and became one of the defining images of the British 10p during this period. But when collectors examine a 1992 coin, they do not simply admire the artwork, they compare tiny details. They examine the lettering around the Queen's portrait, the relationship between letters and punctuation marks, the lion's mane, the details underneath the lion, the position of the denomination and the construction of the edge. Why? Because different dies and production variations can create identifiable varieties. Numismatic references identify several 1992 small 10p varieties involving differences in the obverse and reverse, as well as differences between rounded or wire edges and squared or flatter edges. Numista. These details are exactly the sort of thing that can turn a simple coin search into a fascinating investigation. But there is a warning here that every new collector should remember. A visible difference does not automatically mean rare. Error. Coins are manufactured at extremely high speed, and normal production differences die wear. Handling damage and post-mint scratches can all create unusual-looking marks. A scratch caused by another coin is not necessarily a mint error. A dent created by machinery after the coin left the mint is not necessarily a valuable variety. A strange reflection in a photograph is certainly not proof of a rare mistake. This is why the best collectors compare the suspected coin against normal examples. They look for consistent differences that can be traced back to the manufacturing process. If a feature appears only because the coin was damaged after leaving the mint, it usually does not create the kind of rarity that collectors chase. But if the difference is a genuine die variety or authentic mint error, then the conversation becomes much more interesting. This is also why you should never clean a potentially interesting coin. A collector would rather see the original surface than a polished surface that has been altered. Your coin's natural condition is part of its identity, and once the original surface has been aggressively cleaned, you cannot simply put it back. Now comes the question that creates the biggest excitement. Could a 1992 UK 10p really be worth millions of dollars? The honest answer is that the ordinary circulating 1992 small 10p should not be presented as a guaranteed million-dollar coin. Available numismatic references record approximately 1.413 billion examples of the regular small 1992 issue, which means the normal version was produced on a massive scale. Numista. A coin produced in that quantity does not become worth millions simply because it is more than 30 years old. Age alone is not enough. This is one of the most important lessons in coin collecting. People sometimes assume that a coin becomes extremely valuable simply because it is old, but rarity and demand are much more important. A coin can be 100 years old and still be relatively common, while a much newer coin can be highly desirable if only a small number were produced or if a significant error occurred during manufacture. The 1992 10p is a perfect example of why you have to look beyond the date. The regular circulating version is common, but the same year also includes other forms and varieties. Numismatic references record a much smaller number of 1992 proof examples, and they also identify multiple small 10p varieties. Numista. That does not mean those versions are suddenly worth millions either. It simply demonstrates why identifying the exact version is essential. If someone takes a normal 1992 10p and announces, "This coin is worth $1 million," without identifying a specific rarity and providing credible evidence, that claim should immediately raise questions. A seller's asking price is not the same thing as a confirmed market value. Someone can list almost any coin online for an enormous amount, but that does not mean a collector has actually paid that amount. Real value comes from documented transactions. Collector demand rarity, condition, and authentication. So the responsible way to tell the story is not to promise an overnight fortune. The responsible and far more interesting story is that the 1992 10p has several characteristics worth investigating. And an unusual example can deserve much more attention than an ordinary, circulated piece. If your particular coin has a genuine variety, a recognized error, an unusual issue type or exceptional preservation, then its value can be different from a normal example. That is the mystery you want to solve. Condition is where another major part of the story begins. Because two coins with exactly the same date can look completely different after decades of circulation. Imagine one 1992 10p that spent years moving from pocket to pocket, being thrown into drawers, dropped onto counters, and pushed through vending machines. Its highest design points would gradually become worn. The lion's details could lose sharpness. The queen's portrait could develop contact marks. The surface could become dull and scratched. Now imagine another coin from the same year that was placed into a royal mint set, handled very carefully and stored away almost immediately. The difference can be dramatic. Collectors describe coin condition using grading terminology, and a coin that remains close to its original state can command a premium compared with a heavily circulated example. But again, there is a critical distinction. High condition does not automatically equal extreme value. A common coin in perfect condition is still a common coin, although collectors may prefer it over a damaged example. A rare variety in exceptional condition, however, can be a very different story. This is why you should examine the 1992 coin under strong, even lighting, and preferably with magnification. Look at the finest details of the portrait and lion. Check whether the surfaces retain original luster. Look for contact marks rather than confusing them with mint errors. Examine the rim carefully. Study the edge. If you have a precise digital scale, the small version should be around 6.5 grams, while the large format is around 11.3 grams. The small version is about 24.5 millimeters in diameter, compared with about 28.5 millimeters for the large format, Royal Mint. These measurements can help establish which type you actually have. And remember, never test a suspected rare coin by scratching, scraping, polishing, or bending it. If you believe something unusual is present, preserve the coin exactly as you found it. The surface itself may be part of its value. The photographs of your coin show a circulated-looking example with visible marks and wear, so I would not describe this particular photographed piece as an obvious million-dollar condition specimen. But condition alone is not the entire story. The correct question remains, does the coin have a recognized variety or genuine error that could make it more interesting? The 1992 10p becomes even more fascinating when we look at the different versions connected with that date. Most people see 1992 and assume every coin from that year is identical. But collectors know that is not necessarily true. References identify a 1992 large 10p that was produced for Royal Mint sets, while the smaller 1992 type was the major circulation issue, numista. This creates an important opportunity for anyone searching through old collections. Take the coin out of the drawer, but do not rush to sell it. First, determine its physical size. Is it the smaller 24.5 millimeter version, or the larger 28.5 millimeter version? Is the weight close to the expected specification? Is the edge shaped like the normal version? Does the lettering correspond to one of the documented varieties? Does the reverse show the expected lion details? These questions may sound small, but small details are exactly what numismatics is about. Some 1992 small 10p varieties are considerably less frequently encountered than the main type. Numista's reference data, for example, lists different combinations of obverse, reverse, and edge characteristics, and shows that some varieties are much less common among collectors than the main combination, numista. That is the kind of information that can make a coin hunt exciting without inventing a fantasy price. You are not simply searching for a coin with an old date. You are searching for a specific combination of characteristics. The rarest looking feature, however, still needs authentication. If your coin appears to have an unusual edge, do not assume that it is automatically rare. If the lettering seems doubled, do not immediately call it a doubled die. If the lion looks different, compare it with a normal example. If the coin seems thinner, measure it. If it weighs significantly differently, investigate whether the difference can be explained by wear, damage, or a different issue. This process may sound slower than believing a sensational headline, but it is much more likely to lead to the truth. And the truth is what ultimately matters if you want to know whether your coin deserves to remain in your collection, be sold, or be professionally examined. There is another reason this coin deserves attention. The story of the old and new 10p is actually a story about how Britain modernized its money. The old large 10p was connected physically to the pre-decimal florin, and that connection helped make the early transition to decimal currency easier. But eventually the large format became unnecessary. The government decided that smaller coins were preferable, and the new 10p was introduced in 1992, Royal Mint. For ordinary people, this may have seemed like a simple change in pocket money, but for historians and collectors, it marks a fascinating stage in the evolution of British currency. Think about how many times a coin can change hands during its life. One person spends it at a shop. Another person receives it as change. It goes into a till, then into a bank, then into another person's wallet. Eventually, it may disappear into an old jar or box for decades. When that coin is discovered again, it carries a physical connection to the period in which it circulated. The 1992 10p is particularly interesting because it belongs to the first year of the smaller format. The Royal Mint's own specifications identify September 1992 as the beginning of the smaller version, while the larger version was ultimately demonetized in 1993 Royal Mint. That means 1992 is a transition date, and transition dates often attract collectors because they represent the beginning or ending of a particular design or physical format. But again, history and market value are not the same thing. A coin can have an excellent historical story without being worth a fortune. That does not make it unimportant. In fact, some of the most enjoyable coins to collect are inexpensive. Pieces that tell a fascinating story. The 1992 10p allows you to explore Britain's decimal history, the changing physical design of money, the portraiture of Queen Elizabeth II, the heraldic lion, and the technical process behind modern coin production. Once you start looking at coins this way, a pocket full of change becomes a miniature museum. Every date can represent a different chapter. Every design can reflect a different era, and every unusual variety can become a small numismatic puzzle. But what if your 1992 10p has something that looks like an error? This is where the search becomes truly exciting, but also where you need to be the most careful. Genuine mint errors are created during the manufacturing process, and some can be highly collectible. However, a genuine error needs to be distinguished from ordinary damage. A coin can be struck off center, improperly formed, affected by a die problem, or produced with another manufacturing abnormality. But years of circulation can also produce dents, scratches, flattened edges, and distorted lettering. Those post-mint problems generally do not carry the same significance as a genuine production error. This distinction is extremely important because many viral coin videos show ordinary damage and describe it as a rare error worth thousands or millions. If you want your video to keep viewers watching, you can absolutely create suspense around the possibility of an unusual discovery, but the strongest ending is the truth. You need to prove what the feature is before you put a huge price on it. If you suspect an error, photograph it from several angles. Photograph the entire coin, then take close-ups of the suspected feature. Photograph the edge. Compare the coin with a normal 1992 small 10p, weigh it and measure it. Then seek an experienced numismatist or professional authentication service if the feature appears genuinely unusual. Do not clean it. Do not polish it. Do not scratch it. Do not attempt to improve the appearance. And do not let a stranger pressure you into selling it because they claim to have discovered something that you do not understand. A serious buyer should be able to explain the exact reason for the valuation. They should be able to identify the variety or error and explain why collectors want it. The more extraordinary the price claim, the more extraordinary the evidence should be. If someone says your ordinary-looking 1992 10p is worth $1 million, ask a simple question. What specific feature makes it worth that amount? And where is the documented market evidence? If they cannot answer, the number is probably just a number. Now imagine that you discover your coin is not the normal circulated version, but an unusually preserved example, a proof issue, a recognized variety, or a genuine error. This is where the phrase "do not spend it too quickly" can actually make sense. Not because every 1992 10p is secretly a fortune, but because once a coin appears unusual, you should identify it before selling it. There are documented 1992 proof and brilliant. Uncirculated examples associated with royal mint sets, and the recorded quantities, are far smaller than the enormous circulation mintage of the regular small numista. That makes identification important. Imagine spending a coin for 10 pence and later discovering that it was a special issue or a collectible variety. That is the kind of mistake collectors try to avoid. But the opposite mistake is also possible. Believing a common coin is worth a fortune and refusing a realistic offer because of an exaggerated internet claim. The solution is knowledge. Learn the coin, identify the type, understand its condition, determine whether the unusual feature is real, then compare it with genuine market evidence. Current reference data for ordinary 1992 examples is nowhere close to the sensational million-dollar figures often used in viral titles, which is precisely why your content should make the distinction clear. Numista. A coin can be interesting without being worth millions. A rare variety can be exciting without being a billionaire maker, and a genuine error can be valuable without automatically reaching astronomical prices. The real treasure is finding something that can withstand examination. If the coin survives expert scrutiny and turns out to be genuinely unusual, then you have a story worth telling. If it turns out to be a normal circulated 1992 10p, you still have a fascinating piece of British monetary history. Either way, the coin has taught you something, and that is how serious collectors operate. Curiosity first, identification second, evidence third, and valuation only after all of those steps have been completed. So here's the final question. What should you do if you have a 1992 UK 10 pence coin in your hands right now? Do not panic and do not immediately spend it simply because it looks ordinary. At the same time, do not believe a random claim that your coin is automatically worth millions. Start with the basics. Confirm that it is actually the United Kingdom, 10p and not another denomination or country. Look at the year. Measure the diameter. Check the weight. Study the Queen's portrait. Study the crowned lion. Inspect the lettering. Examine the edge. Compare it against another normal 1992 example. The standard smaller 10p is approximately 24.5 millimeters in diameter and 6.5 grams in weight, while the larger 1992 set issue is approximately 28.5 millimeters and 11.3 grams, Royal Mint. Then ask whether the coin appears circulated, uncirculated, proof, or damaged. Look for genuine varieties rather than random scratches. If you believe you have found an error, preserve the coin and have it examined professionally. And remember the most important truth of all. The regular 1992 small 10p was produced in a huge quantity, so the date by itself is not evidence of $1 million value. Numista. But that does not mean your search should end there. The 1992 date represents the beginning of the smaller 10p format, a major transition in British decimal coinage. It carries a historic portrait, a famous crowned lion design, and the story of Britain's move towards smaller and lighter everyday money. And somewhere among ordinary coins, collectors continue to search for unusual varieties, special issues, and genuine minting errors. So if you have one, look twice before you spend it. Not because you are guaranteed to become a billionaire overnight, but because a small detail can sometimes separate an ordinary coin from a genuinely interesting collectible. The real power of coin collecting is not the promise of instant wealth. It is the ability to recognize something unusual when everyone else sees only pocket change. Your 1992 UK 10 pence may be common, it may be collectible, or it may contain a feature that deserves closer examination. The only way to know is to stop believing the headline for a moment. Pick up the coin, study every detail, and let the evidence tell you what you actually have.